enthusiastic aviators. I'm surrounded by them today. Hi, I'm Ron Timmermans, one of the many hosts for the Florida Aviation Network, and we're broadcasting today live and in the clear from the Central Florida Aerospace Academy on the grounds at Lakeland, Florida. This is the 51st annual Sun and Fun Aerospace Expo, and that's where all the aviation enthusiasts in Central Florida are, and many visitors from other parts of the country and from other countries. We're here at the Sun and Fun and having a good time. You know, I'm a airplane pilot, and for me, wings are what produces lift that gets me off the ground. But there are other devices that produce lift other than the wings of an aircraft. And here to tell us a little bit about that and his experience is Mr. Rex Alexander. Rex, thank you so much.
Ron, thank you.
Good. It's good to have you. Rex is the president of Five Alpha LLC.
Yep.
Doesn't sound like an aviation company, but it really is. So tell us a little bit about your company, Rex.
No, so Five Alpha was established in 2018. I'd been working in a consulting firm with a good friend of mine, Ray Sims. We had Heli Experts International. Took a position with Uber. I was with Uber Elevate as their infrastructure head. There was a point in time where Uber decided that they could make a little bit more money in Uber Eats and just looking to sell out to Joby Aviation.
Interesting.
Saw the handwriting on the wall and decided to start this company. So Five Alpha was born overnight over a weekend, and I left Uber on Friday, started the company on Saturday, Sunday, and signed Uber as my first client on Monday.
Well, that's working out pretty good, but let me tell you a little bit about Rex and his background. He is a veteran rotorcraft professional, a rotor pro as you might call, a helicopter pilot, both first for the U.S. Army and then for the Indiana Air National Guard. Thank you for your service to our country in the military. He's been an instructor pilot, a standardization pilot. He flew offshore helicopters for the oil and gas industry and air ambulances. And so he's got a lot of experience. How many thousands of hours?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5,200 total.
5,200 hours. And all of it rotorcraft? Do you have some fixed wing?
I have
as well?
about 120 hours of fixed wing. So
okay,
I'm a fixed wing private pilot, and I'm also an airframe and power plant technician.
Okay, very
so
good.
I can kill people in multiple ways.
Let's not talk about that because our fundamental theme here in Florida Aviation Network is safety in aviation. So we can just about it. But Rex is a true professional and very dedicated to making aviation safer, and particularly helicopters as well. Right now, an advisor to the Vertical Flight Society. Did they have another name before this?
Prior to being called the Vertical Flight Society, it was the American Helicopter Society International, probably the oldest vertical lift society. They've been around for over 81 years. We're actually kicking off our next forum, 81, in May in Virginia Beach. VFS is more of a technical society with about 6,500 plus members total. Most of the OEMs that are in the helicopter industry, as well as now the advanced air mobility VTOL industry, are members. About 25% of our membership is international. Very much more on technical research and development in the science of aviation. That's what we focus on.
Interesting.
And safety is a huge part. We have a safety committee. We also have an operations and infrastructure committee, but we have a total of 20 plus committees dedicated to different facets of the research.
So in your safety committee for the Vertical Flight Society, do you focus on policies and procedures, or you're talking about specific techniques, or both?
A little bit of everything. We live for the publication of white papers and the research. So we work with universities. We have a lot of members that are universities. I work with a lot of students. Florida Tech, I've worked with Florida Tech, George Mason on different aspects. For my side is the infrastructure safety. We're actually working on a project right now with Rowan University up in New Jersey. It's a risk analysis tool for landing areas that's AI powered. So we're trying to bring that risk down and make operations more efficient through leveraging AI. So that is a product that we're working on with FAA through the FAA Technical Center in Atlantic City.
Give me an idea, because that's kind of interesting. I haven't heard you talk about AI before. So how is AI used in vertical aviation? Give me an example if you can think of one. Or
in the vertical aviation right now, we're still working to leverage AI. So in the world that I'm working on right now is we're looking at how can we leverage AI. So we don't teach pilots in the vertical lift world anything about infrastructure. So if you look at the helicopter flying handbook that the FAA publishes for helicopter pilots, the word heliport doesn't appear anywhere in there, nor does it appear in the instructor's handbook. Pilots don't know what right and wrong looks like. So we're trying to leverage AI to actually have a backup plan for the pilot. So when he's going or she's going someplace, the AI system is looking at it before they get there and say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being worst, 1 being best, what's the risk associated with that? And we can actually plug that risk directly into a safety management system, and then we can have a much better idea of what the risk and liabilities or exposures are to all the infrastructure that we currently service. AI can do that much faster than a pilot can. So we're leveraging geolocated sites, looking at AI, then looking at satellite pictures and looking for obstructions, overlaying airspace, overlaying power lines, overlaying winds, and validating all those different things, and then coming up with a picture of what's the best approach, what's the best departure, does that have a risk factor, and what's that risk factor equal?
Would this be useful then to a pilot pre-flight planning for the flight?
Exactly.
Or in the cockpit actually?
Both.
Okay, good.
So we look at, for an air medical helicopter pilot, there's a lot of times I don't land at physical infrastructure. And one of our next steps that we're looking at, once we kind of knock the bugs out of it a little bit, is I go to an off-site scene. So I'm landing in a bean field, a cornfield on an interstate somewhere.
Where there's been an accident.
Where there's been an accident, we're picking it up. We're hoping that we can actually take that next step, and AI is looking for the safest location for that helicopter en route. So when he gets there, someone has already looked at it, identified the safest location, the recommended approach and departures in there, identified all the hazards before we get there. Because I've been on the other side of that fence as an EMS pilot. 2 o'clock in the morning, you're landing on the interstate, and your fire department's doing a fantastic job, but I've had situations where I've come very close calls with power lines and towers and unlit items. So
that people didn't see in the dark.
Didn't see in the dark.
Yeah.
And you're in a hurry, and they get there and they're trying to set up a landing zone, and they're doing the best they can, and human error falls into everything. So we're looking for this as a next layer of protection.
Excellent. So that AI generated safe landing zone would be transmitted to the pilot in the cockpit.
Right.
And the parameters for him or her to
it's always
bring it in safely.
It's always the pilot's responsibility as a pilot in command to make the final decision, but this is just one of those things that helps outline, okay, this is what we're seeing, and then you get there and validate it.
Wow, that's great. And so the response could be near instantaneous with AI generated analysis and suggestions.
That's our goal.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's great. So you've been involved with safety both as a pilot, instructor pilot, a standardization pilot. Where'd you do standardization pilot training in the Army?
It was in the Army. When I came out, I was an instructor, and when I wound up in the Indiana National Guard, that's when I was identified as a standards instructor, and worked there for 6 years.
So let me just ask you about that. So standardization, what's involved, and does that contribute to safety of aviation?
Oh yeah, it's what you're looking for as a standards instructor is responsible for several other instructors. So you're making sure that they're teaching all your students, all your soldiers the same way, so that when you go to the field, you're not seeing different things going on. You're seeing everybody acting properly, the right way, and then when you do see something different, you can identify it faster.
Exactly. So I teach with a group for Bonanza and Barron pilots, and I'm one of the instructors, and several years ago, maybe almost 20 years ago now, we implemented a standardization program for our pilots, and we told them, we're not trying to make you a cookie cutter. We want you to have these specific standards. You don't take off, initiate a flight training sortie if the weather is less than whatever these minimums are. You cover as many of the items in the curriculum as you can. Always emphasis on safety. If safety is ever potentially compromised, we just don't do that. Move on to another thing, doing something different that would preclude possibly getting into an accident. And at first I didn't understand the value of standardization, but I certainly do now. Again, it's not trying to make somebody just a clone of everyone else. Everyone has their own individuality as to how they deliver the instruction, but the standards, the parameters which they delivered are important to be consistent.
I know one of the examples I've used is as an A&P mechanic, one of the things we always worried about was tool count.
Oh.
Well, if you had a really messy toolbox, it's like, what tool's missing? What's not accounted for? If you have a spot for every tool, as soon as you pull open, you see the spot empty, you know that you're missing a tool. So it's instantaneous recognition because you're standardized. And I see that in aviation because we recognize something that's out of the norm much faster.
Physicians and surgeons do the same thing.
Right.
A tool count at the end to make sure they didn't
We
leave
all
one
hope
in
so.
an appropriate spot. That's good. That's good. Well, in your roles, various roles in vertical aviation, I imagine you've had the opportunity to assess and analyze those unfortunate accidents that did occur and develop causal analysis and perhaps contributing factors. Have you done that a lot or a bit?
A significant amount. We've actually written a couple of white papers on that through the Vertical Flight Society. I partnered with a couple of really good friends. One gentleman, Ray Sims, who I worked with at Heli Experts, has been in this business of heliports for over 40 years. Then the Transportation Safety Institute, which is a US DOT arm for safety. John Roberts is a good friend down there. And then Cliff Johnson, who is an engineer at the Aviation Tech Center for FAA in Atlantic City. And we wrote a white paper. We looked at 50 years of accidents that occur at heliports. And we realized a couple of very specific issues. One, we don't teach pilots anything about what infrastructure is supposed to look like. And I always tell pilots in the helicopter world, I said, just because somebody painted an H on it, do not believe that it's been looked at or it meets any standard anywhere. I said, know what you're getting into. And we're working really hard to create some information that we're hoping to get into the helicopter flying handbook the FAA publishes just on infrastructure. But we looked at 50 years and we found out that 185 accidents that fell within the scope that we looked at, 93% of those occurred at heliports that didn't meet FAA standard.
Wow. So Rex, you've mentioned infrastructure several times.
Right.
I imagine we're talking about the landing spot, right? The thing with the big circle, the H on it, or excuse me, in the case of EMS, it's wherever you have to land, but infrastructure for recognized heliports. So you're developing standards for the design of those?
There's a standard that's in place. There's really two critical standards in the United States. The first one is the Federal Aviation Administration Heliport Design Guide, which is an advisory circular. It was first published in 1959 and has went through at least 11 revisions to date. The most current one, and the number, I hate to say it, I remember these numbers because I read them all the time. So 150/530-2 Delta was published in 2023.
Do I need to write this down?
I'll give you a briefer later.
Okay.
But it's a downloadable document for free from the FAA. It's in their advisory circular library. The other document specifically for heliports is from the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA. That's NFPA 418, heliports, and now vertiport standards. It's the first standard on fire safety for electric aviation, hydrogen aviation at vertiports. In that space, we're seeing a huge change. We talked about it earlier, so vertiports are coming because we're going to have electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft.
How soon?
We have eVTOLs out there flying now, but right now they're experimental. We're waiting for certification on several airframes. They're getting closer. In that space, looking into my crystal ball, I still don't know. It's a challenge because it is a really arduous process to go through the certification system with the FAA.
For the AA?
For any aircraft. Now, since we're creating something fairly new, it's even a little bit more so.
Yeah.
So the certification process, once we get it certified, then we're going to look at actually manufacturing. But there's a lot of other pieces, pilot training, airframe and power plant technician training, parts, logistics, all feed into that. But from the infrastructure side, there's not a huge difference between heliports and vertiports. I was very happy to see the FAA has published what they call the engineering brief. So before an AC becomes an AC, it's usually, you'll see it come out as an engineering. 105 Alpha, they produced 105 in 2022. 105 Alpha came out end of 2024 in December. And in there, they actually listened to everybody in industry that said vertiports are just a subclass of heliport, which is a huge win for industry because none of the local municipality criteria for ordinances has the word vertiport associated with it. They do talk about heliports. So I don't have to create a huge block of ordinances, rules, and regulations at the local level to move forward. We can just say it's a type of heliport with a few minor modifications.
So I'm really interested in this up and coming industry change for advanced air mobility. These are the electric operated vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. So they are a subset of rotorcraft, I guess you could say, multiple rotors.
There's so many variations.
Yeah.
If you look at the Engineering Brief 105, they talk about special rotorcraft. They also talk about powered lift, and there's several different variations of that.
Yeah.
So it's a little more complicated than I'd like to see, but for the most part, they all take off and land vertically.
Yeah, yeah. And helicopters do too. But,
right.
And maybe that's a misnomer, because when helicopters come into a landing pad, they don't hover over it and just settle down routinely.
Not routinely, no. We usually try to use efficiency and aerodynamics, so we're not going through that effective transitional lift and then hovering down, because it takes more power.
Yeah.
You're susceptible to a vortex ring state, settling with power and other things. So anytime you can have a little bit of forward speed, same with the eVTOLs.
So you'd come in on a glide path,
right,
albeit steeper than a fixed wing aircraft would be, and various angles, you told me, depending on the site where the heliport is. How about vertiports for AAMs, advanced air mobility? Are they going to be similar, steep descents, normal descents?
There's a lot of discussion on that right now. As far as what airspace we're protecting to, because there's what the pilot flies and there's what we protect to. So if you look at heliports in the whole grand scheme of things, that is called out in the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 14, subsections 77 and 157. In there, they talk about what the approach surface is, or you'll hear them referred to as imaginary surfaces. For heliports, there's three. So there's a primary surface, which is the landing takeoff area. There's the approach surface, and then there's what they call the transitional surface. So the approach surface is the one which we're talking about, is an 8-to-1 surface. So for every 8 feet you go out, you come up 1 feet.
8 foot horizontally,
8 feet, 1 foot. So it's 7.125 degrees. And that starts at the width of the primary surface, goes out 4,000 feet horizontally, and is then 500 feet above the landing surface, and extends in width to 500 feet, 250 feet either side.
That's the protected surface that you designed to.
Right, and what the FAA is looking for on the 8-to-1 is to make sure there's no obstructions that penetrate that imaginary surface. Now, the pilot's probably not going to fly that. They're going to fly more what they refer to as a normal approach, which is spelled out in the Helicopter Flying Handbook. So normal for a helicopter is 7 to 12. And then 13 to 15 is referred to as steep. There's a shallow approach that's primarily reserved for airports with a lot more space. We don't shoot shallow approaches, and that's
right.
3 degrees.
We'll have similar standards for advanced air mobility?
Right now, we're looking at the same. Right, if you look at Engineering Brief 105 Alpha, those are the exact same standards for the airspace.
Right now, we have 0 vertiports?
There's a couple heliports in the United States in the FAA, what they call ADIP. ADIP, Airport Data Information Portal. That's their master record, that are in the system, but they're not built. So there are a couple there. There's several people talking about building them. There's several people working on building them. There's 2 that have the moniker and the name. So Chicago Vertiport and Dallas Vertiport. However, they're listed as heliports on the regulation. So. Yeah. In that space, they're really heliports with the name vertiport.
Okay, good. But more will be coming, and some will be coming. I think there's one planned for the Lake Nona area of Orlando. I hear a lot about that and see a lot in the newspaper, so I think that'll be one of those pretty soon, and there'll be design standards, I'm glad to know, for bringing those. So we just got a moment or two left. I want to draw on one of your experiences as a helicopter pilot when you were in the military, Rex, to emphasize safety. I know you had one of those, oh my God, accidents or incidents
right.
that didn't result in an accident, a low-level wire strike and night training exercises. What did you learn from that?
I would say in that space, it was a training mission. We were flying with observers in an OH-58 Alpha Charlie in Fort Hood, Texas, and we were doing night vision goggle ops at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we managed to sneak off the edge of the reservation just a few feet because we missed one turn by about 50 meters and found a set of power lines. I would like to make a personal thank you to the people that designed the wire strike protection system that was on our aircraft, because without that, it could have been a whole lot different. But we were napping the earth down in the trees at a low airspeed and hit the power lines. In that, I would say you can never do enough planning. And even after you do all the planning, you can never let your guard down.
Exactly. Well, good. Excellent points from Rex Alexander, president of Five Alpha LLC. Very much interested in helicopter safety, aviation safety in general, and you're doing a lot for vertical aviation. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me, Rex. I appreciate you being here.
Great.
I hope you have a great show here, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. For the Florida Aviation Network, I'm Ron Timmermans, broadcasting live and in the clear from Sun and Fun Aerospace Expo, the 51st one. Stay with us. We got more interviews to come.